So we are trying to find out the themes which are more or less recurrent in paper 2. Fine. So we started with unit 1. क्या themes हैं? एक theme है अर्थशास्त्र, Kautilya's contribution, right? What is the nature of the treatise? That is one important theme on which the questions are asked. If that is the theme, then we need to use the keywords. Keywords क्या है? Statecraft है, monarchy है, right? Then क्या है? What else? Positivist है, positivist. Right? He was guided by, or he had, right, one of the inspirations coming from the positivist study, right? जैसे चारवाक. अब चारवाक फिलॉसफी जो है वो क्या है? Rational है. What is चारवाक philosophy? एकता, anybody who can tell me? Right. Positivist है, empirical है क्या? Right? It is empirical also, but it is not the empirical of the fact or data type, right? It is empirical, analytical. Kautilya has experienced it. He has viewed it, right? He has somewhere a first-hand experience of what was happening, right? And he tried to put all this, right, into a theoretical knowledge. Right? ये knowledge कहीं ना कहीं based है, right, on the presumption. Assumption क्या है अर्थशास्त्र? Now see, what is the basic assumption? That Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed, right? Which Kautilya says these are the upayas. ये upayas किस चीज के हैं? To deal with what? To deal with the use of power, right? Anywhere, if you have to exercise power, if you have to get things done, if you have to make decisions, then they must be based on these upayas. International relation हो या governance हो, right? ये upayas हैं. These ये जो element है, fine, coupled with the idea of dand, नीति, न्याय. See? So coupled with the idea of dand, niti, nyay, now this forms the very basis of the assumptions made by Kautilya, right? That kya assumption hai? Ki there is, or people are not, right, moral by nature. That is his basic assumption. So king ko kya karna padega? Obviously king has to have various roles, right? But men are not moral by nature. Fine. And that is why he uses the idea. There is mats nyay. Might is right. This is how the natural state of things exist. How the basic nature exists is in the form of mats-nyaya. The big eats the small. And that is the very basis of assumption that he makes. Power is central to existence. Power is central to survival. And from here comes his conception of realism. Fine? With obviously some streaks of idealism. अब idealism किसके लिए बोलता है? वो बोलते हैं कि yes, the king is Raja. The king is Rishi. Right? And he is Rajarshi. अब ये थीम है बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि राजा कैसा होना चाहिए. Right? Is the king constitutional slave in Kautilya's logic? Right? Is king bound by the dharma? Analyze. Fine. Was law or dharma an essential component of governance in Kautilya's Arthashastra? Yes. They have already asked questions. Codification of law necessary था या नहीं था? See? नहीं? Codification चाहिए. So codification of laws. Right. So streak of idealism भी है. It's not just realism. Fine. But definitely, realism was the basis of his entire analysis, right? And that is visible in various aspects. Okay. One or many questions will come on this idea. Obviously, it is up to your logic how you are going to connect all of them. आपको कुछ नहीं करना है, सिर्फ कनेक्ट करना है और ये लिखना है. ये terms लिखना जरूरी है. That is how your answer must comprise of, right? Now see. So one is about the nature of state. Next इसका important theme है क्या कि भाई elements of administration or governance or good governance. Fine. Or let us say कि भाई what were the aspects of Arthashastra which are in tune with the contemporary civil services. अभी एक थीम है. Around this also a lot of questions are designed. ये थीम है. What do they ask around this? क्या elements हैं कौटिल्य में administration के? State. कैसा state है? State का emergence कैसा है? Vivasvat, the sun god. फिर मनु is the first lawgiver है. कौटिल्य उसको basically उसी के premise को follow करता है ना मनु. Fine. So Manu, many people will obviously not agree today. Fine, and they may not. Mythical भी हो सकता है, but Manu, right, is supposed to be the first lawgiver. Fine. So ये obvious है कि भाई बहुत सारे लोग जो है आज इसको agree नहीं करेंगे. That's correct. Right. So basically he says कि भाई the law and the nature of the state is what? Like we said, nature of the natural state of society is anarchy. इस anarchy को overcome करने के लिए, to counter this anarchy, this state is created. Fine. So what is the nature of the state? Right. अब state का nature जो है वो divine है. That means obviously it is not saying that God has created the state, but he said yes, the state is somewhere the replacement of the God, so that the anarchy of the society can be overcome. तो ये nature of state divine है. Fine. But ये obvious है कि वो बोलता है कि ये कोई cosmic event नहीं है. It is more or less created by a law, right? But the primary purpose is that when the nature or the natural state of the things are in anarchy, then there is need or there is emergence of a state. So state क्या है? State is the reflection of the rationalization of the social action. Weber or Kautilya same है. Fine. So they are almost same. Though Weber's का logic है कि भाई yes, it is contract. इसका logic है कि भाई कहीं ना कहीं it is emerging. But they both have the same logic that what is a state? It is rationalization. So nature of state या emergence of the state, right? So state के emergence का source क्या है? ये clear है. Law है, highest law है, right? And state will conform to what is that highest law? That is called the dharma or dharm niyam. This dharma, which is the basis of the state, right, comes from obviously or is based on at that point of time, right, one ashram dharma. And obviously which is very distinct to today's logic, right? आज के ये बिल्कुल opposite है to the rule of So one ashram dharma opposite to the rule of law, right? So obviously he finds this as the highest dharma. Then he says कि भाई once the state is created तो राज धर्म है भाई. Fine. Then नीतियां हैं, नीतिज हैं, फिर व्यवहारिका है, day to day administrative laws, right? And likewise right. Fine. फिर राजा के directives हैं, whatever. So there is also a hierarchy of law which governs the state. So state is primarily governed by religious doctrine, no doubt, fine. But there are a lot of elements of rational laws which govern the state. So for him, state seems to, or emergence of the state seems to be divine in nature, but its functioning is more practical, realistic in nature. Fine. तो बोलते हैं कि भाई डे टू डे सिस्टम्स गवर्न होते हैं. अब ये स्टेट का नेचर है. फाइन. पर्पस क्या है? व्हाट इज द पर्पस ऑफ द स्टेट नाउ? दिस इज इंपॉर्टेंट. Most of these scholars, including Kautilya, they believed in reason and logic. उन्होंने बोला कि भाई ऐसे तो हम कुछ भी एक्सेप्ट नहीं कर सकते. तो कहीं ना कहीं उनके पास एक रीजन है, लॉजिक है, right? The method that he uses to understand or develop his content and to understand what state needs to do, what is the actual function of the state, that is called anvikshaki. That is the logic and reason. So he says, I am not talking about things or the discussion or description of the state merely on the basis of my whims and fancies, my personal opinion. He says, I am using the tool, the framework of Anvikshaki, that is the logic and reason. So he says, primary purpose of the state kya hai? Now, yahan se we decode the meaning of Arth Shastra. तो पहले तो सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट, ये शास्त्र मीन्स, शास्त्र क्या है? ट्रिटाइज है, राइट? बट शास्त्र का सेंस क्या है? नॉलेज. लॉजी और लोगोस. लोगोस का सेंस है साइंस. Organized body of knowledge, right? शास्त्र का सेंस ये भी है कि भाई there is a analysis. Things have not been stated, right? Things have not been stated as a theorem or just as a principle. They have been analyzed and then they have been concluded. ये कैसे पता चलता है? The way it has been written. And now this book has almost 15 books, or this compilation has 15 books. These were called adhikarnas. Fine. अब इसको लिखा गया किस स्टाइल में? प्रोज. फाइन. कंक्लूजन किस स्टाइल में है? पोएटिक फॉर्म. और यू कैन से इन द फॉर्म ऑफ कपलेट्स. How it has been concluded in the form of a couplet. That means after every chapter he writes a sukta. Sukt क्या होता है? हर चैप्टर के एंड में एक कपलेट लिखा हुआ है, right? More like few lines which summarize the entire essence of the chapter. उसको हम सूक्त बोलते हैं. सूक्त क्या होता है भाई? फॉर्मूला, right? A conclusive statement is a sukta. Fine. Now see, so he obviously brings the perspective that there is an organized knowledge. This organized knowledge is based on science. Obviously, the emergence of state is more about anarchy. जो anarchy थी उसको overcome करने के लिए state आया. But functioning of the state cannot be merely on the basis of religious doctrines. It has to deal with day-to-day problems. So that is why it becomes realistic, right? It has to deal with power, use of power, coercion, whatever. Fine. तो पहले तो स्टेट का प्राइमरी रोल क्या है? सर्वाइवर. अर्थशास्त्र, राइट? हियर अर्थ ऑब्वियसली यू कैन से उस समय मटेरियल था लैंड. मटेरियल इज मटेरियल. फाइनेंस, इकोनॉमी,
possessions, assets, fine. अर्थ का मतलब ये भी होता है मीनिंग.
Earth itself means meaning of something, right? That's the meaning of earth, right? Then, obviously, how to preserve and protect this earth, right? Wealth ho, right? Yeah. Assets ho, yeah. Acquisitions ho, territorial conquest ho, sorry. That was the actual nature of the state. The nature of the state was of being in perpetual war. Okay, that is the essence of Arthashastra. He says peace hona chahiye, but nature kya hai? Nature of governance is what? That the more you have power, you are perpetually in war with the others who have power. Right? So he says, if these are the possessions, these are the means to acquire power, these are the means to sustain power, right? Army ho, jo bhi ho. So ye possessions ke bina you cannot sustain that power. So what is the primary aim of the state? Is to sustain these positions, is to expand these positions. Obviously, he's talking about the times when the states were imperialistic. Most of the states had imperialistic tendency. So how they are going to sustain this power? So pehla logic wahi hai कि this knowledge of the statecraft of governance is designed on the very idea that how the people in power or the person in power is going to sustain this power, how is going to expand this power, how is going to expand the possessions. इसलिए अर्थशास्त्र, the science of economics or the science of politico-economy, that is the meaning. It is the science of the politico-economy. To sustain the control over resources, you need power, right? To sustain the power, you need resources. Now there is a cycle of political economic relationship. That is the idea, and that is why he is much ahead of the public choice scholars who talk about political economy in 1960s. He is talking somewhere in 323 BC. Imagine. So ये बहुत ahead है. He is talking about political economy actually. Fine. Now see. So पहला तो nature या पहला जो purpose है वो तो यही है, sustain itself. Now obviously second he talks about the king or the Rajan. So when we study his 7 prakritis, or 7 characteristics of the state, right? इसको आप 7 limbs भी बोलते हो. So one of the central role is played by the Raja. Obviously state भी है उसमें, Raja भी है, monarch, Raja. So he says second most important thing or function of the state is what? To have a Raja. बिना राजा के state नहीं हो सकता, right? But he never says that Raja is the state. He never takes it that way, right? He somewhere believes कि Raja is directly linked to the state. It is a monarchical state. But is Raja equal to the state? He says no. Right? Raja जो slave है state का. State क्या है? The ultimate entity of power. Right? So somewhere he distinguishes between Raja and the state. Right? This obviously gives us the idea that he was never talking about a dictatorial Raja, coercive Raja. Fine? He somewhere believed that Raja or the monarch has to be benevolent. Benevolent monarchy or whatever. So he says Raja is not equal to state. So state somewhere is superior to the Raja. Okay, and that is where he dilutes the power of the Raja. Fine, and that is why he does not make monarch the all powerful. He says all power is with the Raja, right? But ultimately Raja किसके under है, किसके control में? State के. Right? State कौन है? Basically the dharma. So Raja can also not violate the dharma. Okay, that is why we say there is rule of law. Fine, but there is difference, right? Raja had different laws by which he is governed.
Fine. So उसको हम रॉयल चार्टर्स,
तो राजा जो है वो रॉयल चार्टर्स या रॉयल ऑर्डर्स या रॉयल जो लॉ था, है ना, उससे गवर्न होता था, नॉट unlike every citizen or every subject. He was not governed that way. Fine. So Raja ka nature kya? Now this also helps us understand okay, how the state are supposed to function. So he treats Raja first as benevolent. He treats Raja different from the state, right? He also says कि भाई Raja does not have absolute control over power. Fine. Raja is not the power. Raja has been delegated the power by the dharma. So if Raja works anywhere against dharma, he is likely to be prosecuted. Right? If he works against the dharma, fine, then he can be killed, he can be prosecuted, he can be removed. Right? He can be publicly executed. Right? People have right to revolt. The same he did with Nanda. So see, he is not given Raja that kind of absolute divine, power. He is not giving him status. He's saying, yes, Raja bhi normal hai, but yes, because he is tied to the state. Right? State and Raja has a reciprocal relationship. State ko chalane ke liye ek Raja chahiye. Fine. The same way we say there shall be a president of India. It cannot be vacant. Fine. So state ke liye Raja hona necessary. Fine. But let's say, so he says that there is absolute control. He does not have absolute control. He is governed by dharma, rule of law. Isko bhi follow karna hai. Fine. Now, so how Raja should be? What are his characteristics? इसका नेचर क्या होना चाहिए? इनहेरेंट नेचर, right? Intrinsic values that guide Raja or Rajan. Palan, Rakshan, Yogakshem. Fine. Then, like I said, Raja has to be Raja plus Raja has to be Rishi. Fine. But he is not an ascetic. Right? He is not a complete sage. He needs to have both the elements. Fine. So Raja के characteristics ये हैं. Obviously, Raja will work as both the moral, legal, moral and legal guardian of the society or praja. Fine, that is the subjects. And that is where he says that now how moral role of the Raja will be visible. So he needs to have Yogakshem as the purpose. He needs to work as Palan, Rakshan of the people. अब ये कैसे visible होगा? When Raja will perform both the roles, right? He will uphold the dharma, right? And he will uphold the naitikta. Naitik, that is ethics. So it says Raja has twin role to uphold the dharma, the highest law, right? And the naitikta, right? Or the ethical principles both. And this is where, right, he says he will work for the welfare of the people or welfare of his subjects. Fine, he will not do anything that affects their comfort or happiness, or in the happiness of the people lies the happiness of the king. Fine. But he says कि भाई who is supposed to protect that happiness? King. तो king का रोल तो प्राइमरी है. हैप्पीनेस में बी पर्पस, ठीक है, लेकिन क्या ये सिर्फ वेलफेयर स्टेट है? नहीं. वेलफेयर इज वन ऑफ द प्राइमरी ऑब्जेक्टिव्स ऑफ द स्टेट. द अदर ऑब्जेक्टिव ऑफ द स्टेट इज टू हैव wars, right? Territorial acquisition is to maintain dand, right? That is army, and likewise. So state के पास बहुत सारे फंक्शन हैं, कमर्शियल फंक्शंस हैं, training, diplomacy, etc. So when we say primarily a welfare state, fine, but only a welfare state? No. Why? क्योंकि इसमें provisions थे, right? Punishments, force, maintain the force, spend a lot of resource on the force, right? Divert the money from the treasury to upgrade the force. So he talks about so many intricate details that he cannot say कि simply it was just a welfare state. अगर welfare state होता तो defense पे इतना expenditure क्यों होता? Right? Commercial functions को इतना promote क्यों करते? Why do they promote the commercial functions? Right? Why trading was promoted? And lot of or main elements of economics are commercial revenue earning, right? What were the main elements of the revenue earning by the state? What were the main functions? Tax. Tax थे. Or animal husbandry. Then agriculture. Fine. Trading. Khani. Mines. Fine. खनी, खनिज, minerals. Fine. बहुत सारे ऐसे functions थे which they were performing. So it was not just a welfare state, it was also a commercial state. Fine. It was also a military state. And likewise. So if the question comes, you cannot simply say that it was just a welfare state. It will be illogical. Welfare to thai, welfare was one important function. Now, obviously, he says कि भाई why, or one of the needs of the Raja or the state to be welfareistic is why, so that he can pacify any revolt against the power. See? Realism वहाँ भी है, वहाँ भी कोई ना कोई purpose है, bargain है. So he's saying why you need to be welfareistic. Why happiness of the subjects is essential. Fine, because the Raja needs to pacify the revolt. He cannot do anything which endangers his position. You cannot do anything that endangers his overall power and control. That is why he says king has a council. Council has an important role of playing the amatyas, mahamatyas. इनका रोल क्या है? Advise करना, right? Administer करना, तीर्थास, right? Departmental heads. So 18 departments around तीर्थास he used to call, right? उसके अध्यक्ष होते थे, तीर्थास अध्यक्ष, the heads of the department. He's talking about elaborate administration. That we'll talk. See, but his primary ambition is that how king can manage the control over power and yet not create dissent in his society. Right? How he can carry on with the wars, with the army, with the protection, with the acquisitions, and still he should not create revolt in his own society. And that is why he talks about an elaborate network of spies, intelligence agents, and likewise. Right? उसके लिए उसने अलग से बजट रखा हुआ था. That is what they do today. Right? IB, R&D, W, what do they do? Right? They are given additional budgets by the government, by the ministries, right, to manage these networks of people. ये वहाँ उस time पे he is talking about the same thing. Right? How to make these spies and the intelligence agents loyal to the king. Fine. So likewise, he suggests lot of, you can say, micro level things which generally goes unnoticed. Fine. Unless you have the real experience of the governance, you will not be able to understand. that these are the operational issues which emerge when we are governing a state. He was very aware of every operational issues. That itself shows that he had centralized the power within himself as a prime minister. फाइन, उसने खुद ही सारी पावर सेंट्रलाइज की हुई थी, तभी ये कंट्रोल हो सकता है. फाइन, बट एज फार एज लेट्स से एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, so administrative elements, correct, under the Raja. Fine. He talks about elaborate administrative system. Fine. Raja has council. Fine. There is Mahamatya. Fine. There are Amatyas. There are Adhyakshas. Fine. There are Up-Adhyakshas. And likewise. Fine, so we can say either they were civil servants or they were ministers and they were civil servants. Fine, so those who managed the tirthas, fine, which could be called as departments. So they could be called as secretaries or directors, deputy directors, secretaries or additional or joint secretaries, या तो हम उसको ही मान लें, or we can call them, him as the prime minister, them as the minister, collectively as the council. Fine, but that is also not very clear because most of these people were appointed at the sweet will. That is what Kautilya uses the term, sweet will of the king. So king had a multifarious activity and he controls mostly everything. Fine. Then you know, obviously there was elaborate structure, Senapati tha, fine, Durgpal tha, Antpal tha, ye pal, whatever. Fine. See, strategic nature of administration. Fine. He talks about creating different kinds of Durg, protection of the power. Durg is the central seat of power where the king will reside. So how to create different forms of Durg, right? How to create mysticism in governance, how to manipulate the opponents and the enemies. वो सब he designs everything. See. But general features क्या है कि भाई see this administration, whosoever will be appointed in the affairs of the state, they will be appointed through merit. Though it is questionable because merit ultimately would be at the discretion of the Raja. इसका discretion जो है वो राजा के पास. But elaborate system of merit was, right, you must be knowing क्या था merit system. Correct. He's conducting exams and first he says that the person who is qualified or who will qualify for the civil services, for the administration, right, must be tested on the concept of gunas. What is a gun? Ethics में भी पूछा गया क्वेश्चन है. Inherent. For example, sugar has the innate nature of being sweet. It can't do anything about it. नहीं? वो कुछ नहीं कर सकता. अगर वो चाहे तो क्या अपना इनहेरेंट नेचर चेंज कर लेगा कि मैं सॉल्टी हो जाऊं? नहीं हो सकता. So he says कि भाई concept of guna, गुण क्या है? Right? These are some special traits. These are some inherent traits, right, which dominate people. He says normally you can understand these gunas, right? Riti. ये क्वेश्चन आया था एथिक्स के पेपर में. Fine. You can understand gunas in terms of three aspects, right? Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Fine. So you have sattva, rajas, tamas. Fine. What is sattva? Non-materialistic nature. Fine. Spiritual nature, religious nature, or the one who is more determined, influenced, motivated, inspired by the altruistic passion, ethical and moral ambitions. Fine. उसका अंदर है सत्व गुण. The one who is sattvic in nature, free from vyadhi. Vyadhi is the disease. Disease can be physical as well as mental. तो बेसिकली वो डिजीज ये नहीं कह रहे हो रहे साइकोपैथिक डिजीजेस होते हैं. पीपल आर ग्रीडी, राइट? पीपल आर criminal, people are violent, people are this. This is sattva gun basically eliminates those elements. So it is more humanistic type of approach, right? अब ये लोग एक पर्टिकुलर पोजीशन के लिए ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है, हाईएस्ट पोजीशन. Fine? Because they are dispassionate about material, dispassionate about money. They are driven by the moral compass, right? National integration, national security, whatever. Fine. Rajas are the people, right, who are obviously somewhere materialistic, right? Glamour, money, fine, or they desire power. They need to satisfy their ego, right? They enjoy the authority, right? They enjoy the benefits that come with the authority. They enjoy the privileges, right? But they are not corrupt, but they are more material seeking. Fine? And that is why they try to live in wealth. They try to live in this, right? They spend more, whatever. Then tamas is more obviously who are guided by darkness, right? Tamas is dark. So they are guided by darkness in the sense they will have a lot of pleasure seeking attitude, comfort seeking. But comfort here be here, but यहाँ पे comfort is not by violating someone, right? But this will be by use of violence. These are the people who can oppress. Right? These are the people who can derive sadist pleasure. Don't use this term, but I'm just for explaining. I'm telling you. ये ऐसे लोग हैं, fine. And obviously these gunas, inherently gunas, they classify people into broadly 3 categories. Though all of us has all these gunas, fine. But he says by conducting the tests, अब जो tests होंगे उसको conduct करके हम क्या कर सकते हैं? We can identify the dominance of the gunas in the person. What kind of test we can do, right? वो बोलता है the primary consideration तो है कि the people who are to be appointed in the civil services should come from reference. They should come from good reference of the king. The people who know, right, king. The people who are loyal to the king, who have been serving the king from generations, right? First preference उनको दी जाएगी. So it should come from internal referral first of all. Fine. Then he should be evaluated generally by the king. Then he should be put to the test. So tests क्या है? क्या टेस्ट हुई? वाक्य शक्ति, प्रज्ञा, धर्मोपधा, अर्थोपधा. So ultimately, he says there can be variety of tests which will be conducted for variety of positions. Fine. This is Vakya Shakti. Is more about the gift of speaking well. So it says speech, speaking good. These are the people who can be emissaries, ambassadors, representatives. ये वो लोग हो सकते हैं जो देश को प्रेजेंट कर सकते हैं दूसरी जगह. Fine. They can become the mouthpiece for the government. They have a special skill of oratory. Fine. Pragya, intelligence. Right? These are the people who may not be able to speak too much, right? But they will have very extraordinary skill of learning things and using them. So pragya is basically the cognitive ability, intelligence. Right? Arthopada, he says, इनको finance की knowledge हो. CA, accountants, they were skilled people, right? Or the test which will evaluate the skill of the people in terms of finance, accounting, and all those things, right? ये लोग वो होंगे जो कुलगुरु बनेंगे, astrologers बनेंगे, right? They will lead the society into the path of dharma. They will give spiritual and religious advice to the king. Right? They can also be used for performing very sincere tasks. फाइन. अब रानी को प्रोटेक्ट करना हो तो हमें कैसा इंसान चाहिए? फाइन. वन हु इज मोर ऑल्ट्रिस्टिक, वन हु इज मोर सात्विक, राइट? सो वी कैनॉट अलाउ द इंटरनल गार्डिंग ऑफ द पैलेस, राइट, वेयर द princes or the prince or the princesses or the ranis, they live, right, to a person who has more lustful approach. So it says कि भाई ये भी एक टेस्ट है, चेस्टिटी का टेस्ट. फाइन. ये भी एक टेस्ट है, रिलीजन का टेस्ट, एंड लाइकवाइज. सो ऑब्वियसली हिज आइडियाज रिफ्लेक्ट द मेरिट बेस्ड सिविल सर्विसेज. फाइन. देन ही हैज टॉक्ड अबाउट इलैबोरेट, राइट, सर्विस कंडीशंस. सैलरी, प्रमोशन, एवरीथिंग ही हैज टॉक्ड अबाउट. डिमोशन कैसे होगा, ग्राउंड्स फॉर पनिशमेंट क्या होंगे, everything, right? He's talked about corruption, fraud, embezzlement, right? Misuse of public resource. Right? He's talked about documentation. Accounts and finance, a dominant documentation. शरीर and व्यय शरीर. Body of income, body of knowledge. Sorry, body of income, body of expenditure. He says, one, we have to keep the record of everything. Fine. फिर और क्या करना है हमें भाई? See, post retirement benefits. Fine. Widows, war widows. He talks about many things. War widows, veterans. Fine. Those who become invalid in the service of the state, and likewise. Fine. State will also run a lot of orphanages, shelters. He's talking about many details. Fine. But yes, so administrative system well developed. Punishment. Fine. अब बोलते हैं कि भाई इसके लिए बहुत important है कि king has to have elaborate system of justice. अब किंग जो है जस्टिस का भी हेड है. सो समवेयर इवन दो दिस किंग इज नॉट एज डिवाइन एज मुगल किंग, राइट? अब मुगल्स बोलते थे भाई किंग जो है वो कौन है भाई? मुगल्स के लिए राजा या एम्परर जो भी किंग है वो फाउंटेन ऑफ जस्टिस होता था. अब यहाँ पे ऐसा किंग नहीं है, बट किंग जो है, यस, ही इज द लास्ट रिजॉर्ट ऑफ जस्टिस. सो किंग को बोलता है कौन है? कंटक.
शोधन, Kantak Shodhan, that is the role of the king. Kantak is obviously the thorns. So, remover of thorns is king. अब ये भी एक रोल है उसका कि justice, fairness, last resort of punishment or whatever is in the hands of king. Fine. So it says कि भाई ultimately सिविल सर्विसेज को मैनेज करना, प्रॉब्लम्स रिजॉल्व करना, पनिशमेंट देना, जस्टिस देना, अल्टीमेटली सब. That is what? These are selected by merit, recruited by merit, but they work at somewhere the personal command. See, that is why it becomes patrimonial. Fine, it becomes personalist. Because you won't find any evidence of a person who was not in the good book of the king and still he was in the civil services. It is impossible. तो हाईली पॉलिटिसाइज था, पेट्रोनाइज था, पेट्रिमोनियल था, फाइन, बट यस मिडिल एंड लोअर लेवल पे द रिक्रूटमेंट्स वर मोस्टली डन बाय एन एग्जामिनेशन और मेरिट सिस्टम. सो दैट इज समथिंग गुड टू थिंक अबाउट अ मोनार्किकल सिस्टम, राइट? सो अब सिविल सर्विसेज में गुड गवर्नेंस के एलिमेंट्स, यू कैन यूज ऑल दिस एलिमेंट्स ऑफ गुड गवर्नेंस. और क्या? फाइन. वन कंपैरिजन कम्स बिटवीन Weber, Machiavelli and Cotilla. Fine. Weber is a person who has compared Machiavelli with Cotilla. So as you know, he was in somewhere 323, 324 BC. He comes in 15th century AD, right? So Machiavelli की जो किताब है प्रिंस और कौटिल्या's अर्थशास्त्र, comparison with Weber's bureaucracy. Fine. Weber's criticism of Kautilya, that Kautilya is more vicious than Machiavelli, is not correct. Fine. Machiavelli is equally vicious as Kautilya. In his Prince, Machiavelli says state is neither moral or or immoral. Fine, it is amoral. The state is beyond the ethical and moral evaluation. So that itself makes state so powerful. State primary purpose is to preserve its power. Fine. Prince is a person who is supposed to exercise power, who is supposed to take over as the king, technically. So Prince Con is the king in the making. Fine. Even though he believes that Prince has a lot of roles to play, but he believes the primary role of the Prince is to preserve the state. And for this, every action of the Prince is justified. Can he wage a war? Yes. Can he kill people? Yes. Can he execute enemies? Yes. Right? Will somebody need to ask the prince the question regarding what he is doing? No. At least Kautilya का जो king था वो इतना lawless नहीं था जो Machiavelli का prince था. Right? Though he talks about laws, right, but mostly dominated by, he says the prince or the state becomes primary to any other thing. And in Machiavelli's analysis, obviously the state is equal to the prince. In Kautilya's analysis, it is not so. State is not equal to the king. So Weber's statement that Kautilya is more dangerous, more vicious than Machiavelli is not totally correct. So even if the statement comes, fine, you can compare it more properly and say no. Fine, Kautilya doesn't seem to be. He is talking in the modern context. He is talking in a very traditional context. Fine, so this is something illogical. So, thank you. So it is illogical to say कि भाई ये vicious है, नहीं. right? You have to compare the context of these two, right? Democracies emerge हो रही थी यूरोप में, and at least Treaty of Westphalia sign हो रही थी. Fine. Greek, Athenian democracies emerge हो रही थी, and still he's talking about this. So obviously he was more power hungry than him. Fine, but that's okay. Both have relevance today in the modern context, right? Both of their tactics is used in the modern context. They are the most read scholars or books in civil services, right? Or most of the civil servants are trained directly or indirectly using their, philosophies, logic, right? Uh, Another is Sun Tzu, The Art of War. He is also one of the most read authors related for civil services. Right? So his Art of War is also important, equally important. Machiavelli, Kautilya, right? Weber, on the other hand, comes in a very different context. That is Industrial Revolution, right? You know about Weber, write it. Fine. Uh, then Kautilya relevance can be asked in terms of the international relations. International relations, today's diplomacy, a lot of things are guided by, yes, Kautilya's Arthashastra. First of all, his concept of mandal or mandal theory. What is a mandal? मंडल क्या होता है? Correct. So, what is the concept of mandal? Today we apply the same thing. Anybody online? भाई बच्चे तुम भी बोल दो कुछ. देखो कॉन्सेप्ट क्या मंडल का? मंडल इज इन्फ्लुएंस. Fine. मंडल, when you study, when you join administration, तो मंडलायुक्त होता है कमिश्नर. मंडलायुक्त we call him. Fine. तो मंडल्स क्या है? Right. एक स्टेट है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल देयर इज अ स्टेट. फाइन. हु आर द नेचुरल एनिमीज? As per Kautilya, those who are adjacent to us, those who are adjoining our boundary are the natural enemies. सीधी सी बात है, नहीं? ये तो लॉजिकल है. फाइन. Why? They will have the biggest need to suppress her. If they have to exercise, if they have to expand their territory, where will they do it? चलिए चाइना को इन्फ्लुएंस बढ़ाना वो कहाँ करेगा? तो उसको सबसे पहले तो हमसे ही टक्कर लेनी पड़ेगी, तो ऑब्वियसली. बांग्लादेश, पाकिस्तान, राइट, साउथ ईस्ट, जो भी है, श्रीलंका. सो द बिगेस्ट थ्रेट और बिगेस्ट एनिमी इज द वन हु इज आवर इमीडिएट नेबर. तभी तो पॉलिसी आई, गुड फेंसेस मेक गुड नेबर्स. राइट? किसने यूज किया है पॉलिसी? वाजपेयी बोलते ना भाई. But this comes from basically a book. I think Robert Frost की book है, poem है, Good Fences or Mending Fences. Some poem he wrote. वहाँ से line आई. Fine, but ये एक philosophy, एक principle है. So now you have immediately your neighbors. ये तो logical है. अब इसका भी एक neighbor होगा. नहीं? So he has threat with us, natural threat, and he has natural threat with this. But he is not a threat for us. Fine? तो ये हमारे लिए कौन हो गया? इसका एनिमी हमारा एलाई हो गया, या पोटेंशियल फॉर एलाई. नॉट नेचुरल एलाई बट पोटेंशियल फॉर एलाई हो सकता है, अफगानिस्तान, पाकिस्तान, लेट अस अज्यूम दैट वे। तो कहीं ना कहीं इसको पोटेंशियल एलाई बनाना इजी है, फाइन। सेम वे इसका नेबर, this neighbor n3, right, he becomes a potential problem for him, fine, but it will be his natural ally. Now see, if we keep making these mandalas, fine, ये मंडल का जो पूरा थ्योरी है, राइट, ये किस पे बेस्ड है? ये एनिमी का एनिमी फ्रेंड है, जो नेचुरल बाउंड्री शेयर करते हैं वो बिगेस्ट एनिमी है, fine, and on the basis of this logic the entire mandal is developed, that how are we going to deal with this one, fine. So third या fourth या seventh जो state है, right, वो generally कैसा हमारा relations के साथ होगा, डिपेंड करता है किसके ऊपर? the way this relationship has been nurtured, the way this progresses, fine. same, अब यहां भी एक मंडल बनेगा, फाइन, ऐसी फिर यहां भी एक मंडल बनेगा, और ये सारे मंडल्स एक दूसरे से इंटरेक्ट करेंगे, फाइन, एंड देन इट विल बी अ प्रॉपर फॉरेन पॉलिसी. So you study any international relation, fine, you will only know the facts and information, but when you read Kautilya, you realize the basic philosophy behind or basic behavior of people in international relations. Realism, yes, he says, yes, there is realism. इंटरनेशनल डिप्लोमेसी में रियलिज्म बहुत डोमिनेंट है, फाइन. पावर पॉलिटिक्स डोमिनेंट है, सर्वाइवल इज वन ऑफ द बिगेस्ट टैक्टिक्स, फाइन. स्ट्रेटेजिक एडवांटेजेस बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्यों? बिकॉज वी कैन हैव आवर कैपिटल्स, sensitive installations in certain places where we have strategic advantages, जैसे हमारे पास height, right, Himalayas एक strategic advantage for us, I'm talking about in general. So height एक strategic advantage है, right, sea, water एक strategic advantage है. So littoral states are exposed but they are also equally protected, fine. So see, there are a lot of strategic advantages that we should explore, that how we are going to use our power, right? So he says कि this is how mandal works, right, and in mandal we have to find out the means. यहाँ पे वो बोलते हैं कि यहाँ भी means जरूरी है, साम दाम दंड भेद, fine. Sam is discussion, deliberation, negotiation. Dam is buyout. Pay the price, take it. Dand is threaten, force, right? Ved is manipulate. Divide and rule. ब्रिटिशर्स ने जो किया, तभी ये बुक गायब हो गई थी. Fine. When the Britishers came to India, this book suddenly got disappeared. And then somewhere it was found in 1913 in a library, I think in Madurai or Mysore. Professor Shama Shastri was the person who translated it. Fine. Or you can say revived the idea. And otherwise, it was missing. That means obviously the Britishers would have drastically used this book to control rest of the world and even India. Fine. So he says that there is this, plus you have to क्लासीफाई कि भाई व्हाट एक्शन यू विल टेक. सो कुछ एक्शन जैसे वो बताते हैं भाई, समस्या और समरस्य होना. समरस्य होना मीन्स यू हैव टू बी माइल्ड, यू हैव टू बी मॉडरेट. सो मॉडरेट रहो, माइल्ड रहो, मैनेज करो. He says be or use the middle path. Don't always go to extremes, fine? Or even if the war becomes imminent, he says, avoid the war. So he's not supporting the idea of war. He's saying, avoid the war as much as possible. Follow a middle path. Fine? Then he says, if you have someone as weak neighbor, he says, can be used as an ally. But he says, because the weak is vulnerable, Nepal, weak is vulnerable, it is most likely to break. So he says, you can either control the weak neighbor, acquire the entire territory, right? Or make a good relations with them, but be watchful, because this is the one who is going to create trouble for you in future. Why? Because it is weak. It can be easily captured by the enemy. It can be easily manipulated by the enemy. Then he says, the strong neighbor. Fine. He is a natural potential. क्या है? Conqueror. So the strong neighbor जो है, ये potential natural conqueror है. Vijay Jishu is the natural conqueror. So he says he's a natural conqueror, but yes, it is possible that he may not be that active. It may be neutral. Udasin. Udasin means ये neutral हो सकता है. It might not be willing to conquer. It might not be willing to have army and conflict. It might want to avoid conflicts. So he says you can have good relation with him, though he's a potential conqueror. Fine, and wait for the time when you have more power than him. बोलता वो उदासीन हो सकता है. दूसरा उग्र हो सकता है. A neighbor which is powerful but is not interested in conflict and expansion and war, udasin. Fine, neutral type. The one who is powerful but still interested in conflict and war and acquisition and expansion is ugra. He says for him, you'll have to wait. Fine. If he wants to conquer you, then you'll have to fight. He says, else you want to make peace with him, right? And wait for the time when you become more powerful. So he gives a lot of, obviously, recommendations. Fine. How to have ambassadors, how to have emissaries, right? How to keep watch on them, how to maintain their loyalty, everything. Right? So foreign policy or foreign politics also he understands very well. Fine. As his context was monarchy, his context was traditional society. That is a big issue because today we cannot exactly replicate his model. Fine. Context is different. Fine. But is the nature of human behavior different? No. Today we are more civilized, right? But still the inherent need for power has not died down. अब ये कैसे logically understandable है? See, we talk about globalization. Right? We are talking about good governance agenda. Good governance agenda कहाँ से आता है? World Bank से आता है. World Bank जो है neoliberal policy wants to promote the neoliberal policy. Fine. So good governance agenda is also driven by an ideology. Globalization is driven by the concept of neo-imperialism. Fine. Or neo-colonialism. Fine. Or eco. See? So multilateral institutions भी तो वही कर रहे हैं. So in spite of the emergence of globalization, right, the concern or the influence of realism has not declined. The concern for power has not declined. Demilitarization is not taking place. In fact, remilitarization is taking place, and there are a lot of evidences for that, you know. Fine. So you can understand कि it is not easy, right, to think of non-applicability of Kautilya in today's world, right? Most of the things that are there can be witnessed in the or through the lens of Arthashastra, right? अभी एक बहुत important aspect था, so मैंने ज़्यादा detail बता दिया, right? Otherwise you have studied all this. May not be in this format, but you have studied obviously. Fine. दूसरा important theme है जो मुगल versus British आता है. Fine. Mughal versus British. Fine. Simple है. Mughal elements. What were the elements of Mughal administration visible or carried forward by the Britishers? Mughals had already carried forward the Sultanate, the elements of the Sultanate period or the Suris. So it is obvious that somewhere, right, the Britishers maintained the continuity with the Mughals. Right? Where did they maintain the continuity? Fine. Yes, you can switch on the useless lights. Light चली गई. Load shedding है इधर. Concept of bazaar, revenue system, village administration, basic structure of power, codification of laws, use of religion, right? Even the concept of district, fine, or you can say the territorial distribution. Fine. Hierarchy of officials, almost same with new nomenclature. Right? अगर आप, if you see the Karodi Faujdar, right, plus the Amal Guzar, and ये बन गया collector almost. Fine. So they had similar classifications. They continued with many of the revenue codes, revenue laws, village level जो laws थे, right? जो भी village का जो basic, structure था, arrangement था, right? More or less they continued with this, right? It was only when the first war of independence takes place, or you can say the impact of Macaulay report take place, then only they start modifying this relationship. Fine. That also they continued with many of the aspects. Fine. In fact, you can say कि भाई जो गवर्नर था ब्रिटिश का, right, और जो सूबेदार था मुगल का, almost same था. Fine. And if we say patronage, yes, before 87, 88, 1857, 1858, right, the British system worked totally on patronage. The Mughal administration was non-merit based. Right? Mughal administration was totally military dominated, and that is what British administration was also. Fine, civil servants तो बाद में आए, पहले तो वो military dominated ही थे, military officials थे, civil servants तो थे ही नहीं, they were servants of the company. And even if they were civil servants, right, they mostly had the dominance of military over civil services. Fine. Only when imperial service comes into picture, right, the executive council of the governor general expands, या viceroy expands, then you will find the influence of the civil services on military. Otherwise, it was military dominance on administration. So they can ask these questions, right? That what are the common elements of this? How Mughals have influenced British, right? Or certain things that you know, how Mughal administration was 𝐃𝐨𝐰𝐧𝐥𝐨𝐚𝐝. Fine. What are the, or what was the position of the king or monarch right? In the Mughal administration, was he the center of power? Fine. Was he an autocrat? Was he as benevolent as the Cotilian king? No, he was not, except few of them. Fine. So was he a autocrat? Was he despotic? Right? Was he dictatorial? Yes. Why he was? Because of the various reasons that he centralized, he controlled everything. He can overrule any council's decision. Right? Nobody, or generally the kings used to treat themselves as the representatives of the god itself. The state and the king were same. That is also a drawback. Right? So it was never believed that the king is the instrument of the state. Right? The king was supposed to be the state. Though Mughal administration was also quite elaborate, well developed, right? But there was a kind of monotony. Monotony क्यों थी? Because similar administrative structure right from the center to the, तो एक तरह से unitary model था, right? It was more of a unitary model. Fine. So मुगल से रिलेटेड जनरली ये है या फिर रेवेन्यू टोडरमल का रिफॉर्म्स दे कैन मैक्सिमम दे कैन आस्क by टोडरमल, ठीक है? So kindly write it. You must have studied in history. Fine. वैसे भी हिस्ट्री में ज़्यादा बेटर डिटेल होगा कि भाई क्या रेवेन्यू रिफॉर्म्स के टोडरमल का क्या कंट्रीब्यूशन है. फाइन. एंड अकबर का क्या कंट्रीब्यूशन रहा गवर्नेंस में सी द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ territorial specialization. Okay, divided the entire territory into सूबाज. So अकबर ने अराउंड 15 सूबाज बनाए, फिर औरंगजेब ने शायद 18 बनाए, समथिंग लाइक दैट. Fine, and they had somewhere streamlined the central control over administration. Fine. By this, they somewhere, what they did, they made the administrative system, cloned the administrative system in one suba with the other. तो ये easy कर दिया उन्होंने control करना. Fine. Because it was a huge territory, right? Lack of means of transport, बहुत सारे और issues थे, and because of that it was slow. It was highly bureaucratic in nature, right? Everything was recorded. It was a military administration, so बहुत ज़्यादा discipline था, hierarchical था. कुछ भी होने में बहुत time. Fine. See. So one nature of question can be this, right? A British administration may mostly they have this Indianization of civil services, right? They keep asking this question many times. Fine. Or they may ask the impact of British or colonial administration features in today's civil, civil services. Fine. Is Indian administration a relic of the past? Right? Do we have a colonial hangover? Fine. Or you can say now they can link all those collectors office, the evolution of collectors office since British times till present. Right? So start with basic functions. What were the basic functions performed? The need for the emergence of collector's office, how collector's office emerged under East India Company. Then it went in transformation. Right? Went transformation after 1850, 354. Right? दो major contributors थे, Macaulay report है, right? And Northcote Travelling report. Right? उसके पहले you can discuss about Munro, Cornwallis,
Right? Munro versus Cornwallis, right? And later on Macaulay, right? And how they have contributed to the emergence of the modern civil services in India, right? Even though Cornwallis code is highly valued, but Munro also brought specific reforms in Madras, wherever he was the governor. उसने भी कुछ done extraordinary reforms किए, no doubt. Fine, both had different tendencies, but basic premise of centralization was always there, right? So ये कैसे हुआ? फिर जब एचिंसन कमीशन आता है, fine, and it brings the state civil services, provincial civil services, और जो भी classification ये it does the classification, fine, that you can write, fine. Then how from Aitchison to 1909 to 1919 to 1923-24, Royal Commission on Decentralization, fine, या Lee Commission, fine, 1912 Islington Commission, 1882, 1870, Mayo, Ripon, what all you can write. Fine, but technically Indianization कभी होता नहीं है. Fine, even when we are leaving, when we have become independent, then also 60% of the workforce were either Anglo-Indians or Britishers, and only 40% could be considered as natives, right? Obviously, the nature of civil services जो establish हुआ हेस्टिंग्स के टाइम से ही, या later on वेलेस्ली, मुनरो, कॉर्नवालिस, fine. This covenant, right, versus non-covenant. This nature always remained. So Indians का participation minimum था. Indianization, it took a lot of time. Unless the Federal Public Service Commission या Imperial Public Service Commission UPSC 1926 में इंडिया में बना, till the time you cannot say Indianization started. Fine. 1900 और इनिशियली व्हेन फोर्ट विलियम कलकत्ता में बना सिविल सर्विस ट्रेनिंग, फिर शिफ्ट हो गया इंग्लैंड में, फिर वापस समवेयर 1904 के अराउंड इट कम्स टू इंडिया, राइट? ओनली देन यू कैन से सम एलिमेंट ऑफ इंडियनाइजेशन स्टार्ट. फाइन, सो you can say that this Indianization has been going on, and even today the Indianization is still in the process. Fine. अब उसमें आप मंडल कमीशन को जोड़ दो. First constitutional amendment, if you want, you can add it, right? Or many other reforms that have been done. Mandal 1, Mandal 2, fine, Mandal 3 now, right? EWS, Mandal 3 only, fine. So it is logical that you can do that also. Yes, we are within the Indianization of civil services. Still, we are trying to contextualize civil services. अभी भी regional variations, regional exclusions visible हैं भी, तो creamy layer, the benefits are going to the creamy layer or mostly to the elites within this. So the nature of civil services जो है, right, वो भी elitist है. An elitist is not bad. First, you have to understand. Fine. What do we mean elitist is very contextual in our society. Our society is not based on class or economic categorization. The major basis of political system or politicians come from generally from the middle, or don't say middle class, or higher class and lower class. Civil services comes from middle class. एक बहुत बड़ा ड्रॉबैक है. Indian context में जो भी civil services है, that mostly draws from the middle class, right? Whereas the politicians come from the lowest class or the highest class. So who is elite? पहले ये define करना पड़ेगा. Fine. Middle class becomes elitist by nature or by virtue of its education. Right?
and dominated by a particular type of caste initially, not now, because they were the people who were into the government jobs. Fine. So ब्राह्मण्स हो गए या जो भी हो गए, जनरल कैटेगरी हो गए, कायस्थ हो गए, श्रीवास्तवास हो गए, सिन्हास हो गए, जो भी ये हैं, most of them, right, sir, the south of India, या जो भी है. So people who have dominated these civil services are mostly coming from educated backgrounds, and that is how it was created, right? A dominant education enterprise. You cannot crack civil services if you're not highly educated. Fine. Obviously, acquiring education is costly. Not everybody can acquire education. Fine. Or acquiring education may be one vocation. उसका एक target हो सकता है, उसका एक purpose हो सकता है life में, right? तो mostly जो higher caste, so-called higher caste थे, right? They had this ultimate purpose कि भाई education acquire करो, knowledge acquire करो. क्यों? Through that we can control the society. So they found a lot of role, prominence in the civil services, right? And it continued till 1990s, as you know, until VP Singh comes to power. But post 1992, it's been more than 30 years. We cannot blame it now. Fine? तो मंडल कमीशन के आने के बाद, ओबीसी रिजर्वेशन आने के बाद, अब हम ब्लेम नहीं कर सकते कि अभी भी एलिटिस्ट है. लॉट ऑफ एलिटिस्ट कैरेक्टर हैज बीन रिमूव्ड. तो अभी भी कॉलोनियल है, दैट इज नॉट द क्वेश्चन. अभी भी एलिटिस्ट है, दैट इज द क्वेश्चन. Fine. So if I treat colonial equal to elitist, if I treat colonial equal to exploitative, so more or less the features are still there. Fine. Police आज भी उतनी exploitative है, mostly ज़्यादा exploitative है than the British times. Fine. So this can be one nature of question which can transcend your unit 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. Fine. It can go beyond that also.